So I grew up in an unchurched home. Some of you know that about so it's just my story. It's how I grew up. But when I was a teenager, a neighbor a couple doors down invited me and my younger sister to church. And 3 days later, at their summer vacation Bible school, I trusted Christ with my life, and I began an exciting new journey in Christ. And I had so much to learn, and I was super excited about it as well. You see, in the Bible, there are these really, really big ideas that lead to a blessed life. And even as a teenager, I was eager to lay hold of those ideas because I wanted the blessing of God in my life. Anybody feeling me on that? Anybody want the blessing of God on your life, right? Yeah? And well, I wanted to get after it. And one of the biggest ones that I learned very early on didn't come through a sermon, but rather it came as I witnessed it being lived out in the life of an Italian man named Albattanti. Now, if you were here a couple of weeks ago, I gave a message on the importance of coming around the table. It's called Rediscovering the Convivium. And by the way, I'm so proud of so many of you that have come up to me and said, man, we're getting after it as a family and actually having dinner 5 nights a week. I'm so inspired by it. I didn't see that coming. Several people have been literally weeping as they're telling me of the transformation that is happening within their family as they put Christ first in their life in this way. Well, Albattanti was in Cleveland, Ohio, where I grew up, and he was an independent grocer. He had food, like lots of food. As a matter of fact, if you were here, I ended up dating his oldest daughter, Corky. She's now known as Roseanne. She needed a grown-up name to become a pastor's wife. And I remember after church on Sunday morning, I would go to their house for lunch. And then after Sunday night service, I would go back to her house again after I started dating her. And Roseanne would go down into the basement. And it was a freezer full of meats, all kinds of meats. And she would we'd pull out 2 steaks and thaw them out and cook them for me. I remember the garlic salt on the steak and the way to a man's heart is through his stomach, right? And she wanted me bad. And I ended up marrying her, right? But her dad, Albattanti, I remember from the very first day that I was in his home to this very day, that at the mealtime, he never delegated the prayer to anybody else in the family. It was his responsibility, and it just really, really captured me how a man that owns a grocery store would thank God for the food. But he didn't stop there. He thanked God for everything. It was his point of view that absolutely everything that he has and everything that he is came from God. And he showed that to me as a young kid. For example, I want you to take a breath right now. Ready? Take a deep breath. Okay, now let it out. Albattanti would say that breath was sponsored by God. He granted it to you, and you should live with the understanding of that. Okay, one more time. Ready? Another breath granted by God, and you should say, thank you. Anybody want to say thank you? Thank you. He was teaching me through his life one of the biggest operating principles in the Christian life. It's one of the big ideas that we learned in the Believe series we did a while back, if you were here. One of the 10 biggest beliefs in the Bible that drives us to the blessed life. I'm going to put it up on the screen. I'm going to invite you to shout it out loud with me. Ready? Everything we are and everything we own belongs to God. Big ideas. As a matter of fact, I'm going to introduce you to some characters in the Bible who lived their life this way. Big characters. First, we'll go with Moses. Moses says in Deuteronomy 10, "To the Lord your God belong the heavens, even the highest heavens, the earth, and everything in it." Then we move to the life of King David, a big character in the Bible. This is what he writes in Psalm 24. "The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it." Not just everything, but everyone belongs to God. Now, let's skip to the life of Job. Job quotes God in Job 41. "Who has claim against me that I must pay?" God says. Everything under heaven belongs to me. Then we move to the prophet Haggai. Haggai says, the silver is mine and the gold is mine, declares the Lord Almighty. And then we'll go to a man named Asaph. Asaph was one of the 3 priests that King David commissioned to lead the singing in the house of Yahweh. In Psalm 50, he writes, for every animal of the forest is mine, and here's this famous line, and the cattle on 1,000 hills. I know every bird in the mountains, and the insects in the fields are mine. Well, you can actually have them. If I were hungry, God says, I would not tell you, for the world is mine, and all that is in it. Now, if you're new to the Bible, you need to know that anytime something is repeated over and over again in the Bible, it's signaling to us that this is a big idea and you need to pay careful attention to it and even seek to apply the implications to your life. Because one of the biggest misses of many people is we miss this very point that all of these characters in the Bible really live their lives by. And what ends up happening is we can walk around with the attitude that we made it and that it belongs to us. And the Bible says if you're not careful, little by little over time, you're going to develop an arrogance about you before God, and that's dangerous. Solomon proves that it doesn't belong to us in his writings in Ecclesiastes chapter 5. Everyone comes naked from their mother's womb, and as everyone comes, so they depart. They take nothing from their toil that they can carry in their hands. Some of you have seen this phrase. You've never seen a hearse pulling a U-Haul, right? You've never actually seen that. But there are a couple people over time who have tried. Now, this is an oldie but a goodie, but maybe some of you are new to church and haven't heard this one, right? But here it is. There's this old miser rich guy, that wanted to try to take his money with him when he died. And so he rounded up 3 of his friends. One was a doctor, the other a principal, and a pastor. And he says, I'm going to give you each $1 million. And then when they are burying me, right before they bury me, I want you to put this $1 million in an envelope and I want you to throw it in my casket at the last minute. And so sure enough, the old geezer dies. And the 3 guys are at the funeral and they all 3 put the envelope into the casket. And later they gather together and they're talking about it. And finally the doctor said, I just can't stand it anymore. I have to confess, I'm building a new wing and I needed $800,000. And so I took $800,000 and I only put $200,000 in. And then the principal said, okay, if we're confessing, I got to tell you that, I'm trying to build a new computer lab and I needed $500,000. So I kept $500,000. And I only put $500,000 into the casket. And they both looked over at the pastor, and he was shaking his head in disgust. He says, I cannot believe you held that money out. I put in a check for the entire amount. Because the pastor knows from the teaching of Solomon that you came into the world with nothing, and you will leave with nothing. So what I want to do is, I want to dive into Deuteronomy chapter 8. If you've never feasted on this passage, it's good stuff. And here, Moses is relating the commands of God to the wandering children of Israel in the wilderness. That's where they're at in the story. And he's giving them these commands. And I think many people forget that the commands of God, that sounds like an overbearing word, restrictive. The commands of God are not for God's sake. The commands of God are for our sake. These are the principles that will keep you on the path of blessing. And so Moses reminds them that the Lord had brought them out of slavery, that he was taking care of their every needs, that he was providing food for them every morning, that he was protecting and blessing them in the battles that they encountered, and ultimately, he was leading them to a place called the Promised Land, through the wilderness to the Promised Land. God was going to give them some prime real estate from which they would build their lives upon. However, the children of Israel kept forgetting. And so in verse 10 of chapter 8, Moses writes, when you have eaten and are satisfied, praise the Lord your God for the good land he has given you. Moses is saying, when you eat and are satisfied, you should stop and not only thank God for the food, but you should also thank him for the land because he gave that to you as well. Now for us, most of us don't live off the land. We live off of a paycheck. So the modern application would be that every time you eat food, you thank God, right? But every time you get a paycheck, you should also do the same thing. You should clasp your hands together and bow your head, or raise your hands to the heaven and look to God and simply say, thank you. Because the paycheck is the economic driver by which you are able to eat and survive and even be satisfied, and that all came from God. And this is what my father-in-law was modeling for me. When you get your paycheck, you even thank him for that. Now Moses continues in the next verse, verse 11. Be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God, failing to observe his commands, his laws and his decrees that I am giving you this day. Otherwise, when you eat and are satisfied, when you build fine houses and settle down, and when your herds and flocks grow large and your silver and gold increase and all you have is multiplied, then your heart will become proud and you will forget the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I want you to underline the words, if you're taking notes, do not forget. Do not forget. Moses is saying, do not forget, children of Israel, where all of this is coming from. And for us today, when you get into the cycle where you're making money and living in a nice house and driving a nice car and having enough discretionary money to keep your life busy with a lot of things, it is easy to forget where all of it came from and from where you came from. Moses reminds the people where they came from in the next few verses. Take a look at verse 15. Moses writes, God led you through the vast and dreadful wilderness, that thirsty and waterless land, with its venomous snakes and scorpions. He brought water out of hard rock. He gave you manna to eat in the wilderness, something your ancestors had never known, to humble and test you so that in the end it might go well with you. You might say to yourself, my power and strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. Moses is saying, don't forget, Israel. God has led you now for years through some pretty tough situations. You remember, don't you? They were in the wilderness. They were in the desert. There was no food for an estimated 1 million people who were traversing from Egypt through the wilderness, the desert, into the promised land. And yet God provided food for them every morning. It just fell out of the sky. They didn't have to do anything to till the ground or to prepare. It just fell out of the sky every morning. There was not enough water for 1 million people. And so Moses could speak to a rock and the freshest spring water would gush out of it, enough for everybody to be satisfied. God intended it, he said, this way, meaning they had to do nothing in these dire circumstances to be satisfied and provided for. He did it to put them in a dependent situation where in these early days, because he knows he's going to overly bless them and they're going to likely forget when they come upon all the riches he has for them. So in this season, he is putting them in a place of dependence. He's humbling them because it would be really hard to forget of a season in your life where you were desperate and you were going to die without intervention, and God dropped food out of heaven. Are you kidding me? And water comes out of a rock so that we survive. It would be hard to forget, wouldn't it? But we forget. Don't forget where you've come from. That's dangerous. I'll tell you where I came from. There's some things I've never told you before. I come from a poor family that lived in southwestern Pennsylvania. My mom, when she was little, she lived in a house that literally had a dirt floor and outdoor plumbing. My mom's biological dad was an alcoholic, and it came for her with all of the trauma and disruption in her life through that situation. But her dad died when she was just a little kid. He was drunk, and he threw up, and he choked on his own vomit. That's my story. My dad was one of 11 children. His mom never married any of the men that she was with, and she refused to tell my dad, even to her deathbed, who her biological dad was. And so the reality is my name wouldn't be Frazee. I take that from my grandmother. I would have some different name. But in my story, I never knew who my grandfather was. My mom and dad both had an 8th grade education. They did not see from where they were at how education could possibly be practical or be to their advantage. And so they dropped off like everyone else did in the area. In search for a better life, my mom and dad packed up everything they owned, and they moved me at the age of 3 and my brother at the age of 8 to Cleveland, Ohio. And there my dad took on a blue-collar job. And that's what he did for the rest of his life until he retired. It was there that he learned that education would have helped him with advancement. But he was passed up every single time. And as a result, I grew up in a lower middle income family. But that wasn't the big challenge. The big challenge in my story is that I was not raised in a family of faith. My mom was interested, but my dad was absolutely not interested. So I was lost spiritually with no good reason to expect that anybody would take an interest in me. I had nothing to offer anybody. I was lost. But then, one day, God sent this man to me, a neighbor that lived 2 doors down, and he led me out of my Egypt and into a relationship with Jesus. And that has changed the very trajectory of my life, beginning in that week in June 1974. And I won't go over all the things that has happened to my life over the last 45 years. But suffice it to say, I have lived a blessed life. Every day God whispers to me for my good, Randy, do not forget where you came from and where all of this is coming from. In verse 18 of the same chapter, Moses continues, but remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth and so confirms his covenant, which he swore to your ancestors as it is today. If you're taking notes, I also want you to underline the word remember. Do not forget is a passive act, but remember is active. I can accidentally forget something, but I must proactively focus to remember. Again, anytime something is repeated over and over again in the Bible, it is signaling to you this is a big deal. Just in the book of Deuteronomy, on 16 occasions, Moses invites Israel to remember. To remember. This is what my father-in-law taught me with his life, the act of remembering. Remembering where God brought me from, remembering that everything I have comes from his good hand. Not just the food that is on our table, but even the abilities that he embedded in me that give me the capacity to produce wealth. Do you know that? I even to this day, my father-in-law, my spiritual mentor, 91 years old, I love sitting with him and hearing his entrepreneurial stories of being a grocer. I mean, how he would go down to the market in downtown Cleveland and wheel and deal with the local produce people, and how he would, buy cases of this or that and come back and display it, and how he would sell it, and how he would move it, and how he would treat the people. And I just shake my head in amazement at his entrepreneurial abilities. He would say, Randy, make no mistake. That's not from me. God gave that. He made me an entrepreneur. I've talked to so many of you, and your skill sets are just off the charts, things that I can't even imagine, like math. You're kidding me? I have to hire people to do my math for me. Some of you can just rattle off sales tax like nobody's business. I mean, the skill sets you guys have as engineers and as moms, I mean, I marvel at it. Make no bones about it. God implanted those skills within you to give you the capacity to earn wealth. And so you need to thank him every day for the mental acumen and the uniqueness of your gift. I want to challenge everybody today, particularly our dads, to be known for the act of remembering. If at no other time than at the dinner table, like my father-in-law, I would encourage you, don't pass the prayer. This is a primo opportunity for you to humble yourself in the presence of your wife and or your children or whoever beckons in your door, even people far from God, and go unashamed to know that you have no problem humbling yourself and acknowledging and remembering where you came from, and that everything belongs to him. I double dog dare you. I talked to a guy after the service today who came up to me, very emotional, and he said, Randy, I'm so convinced of this principle when I was a young teenager that I'd be the kind of person that would forget and not remember. I tattooed Deuteronomy 8, the word remember, Deuteronomy 8, on my forearm. So the big question, if God owns everything we have, then how does God want me to manage what he has entrusted to me? Now, this is where I want to do something a little bit unique. I'm asking our deacons if they would come on into the room, and they're going to pass out an envelope to you. I want one envelope for every adult, okay? One envelope for every adult, and I'm going to ask you, do not open the envelope. Now, I know for some of you, that's just code word for opening it, because you are filled with a sin nature and you always want to do things you're told not to do. You didn't want to do it before, you have no desire to do it, but now I'm not supposed to, I'm going to. Don't do it, okay? Restrain yourself for your pastor for just a few minutes, okay? Can you do that? So, and as they're passing out tonight, one per adult, hold on to it. I'm going to come back to it in a moment. And as they're doing that, I want to introduce you, if you've not seen it, Malachi chapter 3, verse 10 gives us a universal line item in the budget for every follower of God, okay? Here it is. Malachi writes, bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Test me in this, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will be no room enough to store it. God says, I want you to take the first tenth, that's what a tithe means. I want you to take the first tenth of the money I gave you. Now you keep in mind, I gave you 100%. It came from me, and all I'm asking for you is to give me the first tenth back to me. That to me, that just seems like a super reasonable principle. But the principle is really hard for us. I mean, it's hard for most of us. It's a struggle. Matter of fact, it keeps many of us from experiencing it because the math doesn't work. I mean, you're struggling to make ends meet. There's some things that you want, and you're telling me that I'm going to do better if I work off of 90% and give God 10 than if I keep 100%. And the answer is yes. It's hard, but in God's economy, the way it works is that he intersects himself in the stream of your life when you believe and obey him. Some of you in every service have shaken your head to the math of God, that if you give him 10%, he will make your 90% go further than your 100% without obedience to him. Do I have any head shakes? Couple? It is, if so, God, you say, I just can't believe it. God says, okay, don't believe me. He says, test me in this. And then, give me 6 months. And if I don't open up the floodgates and begin to bless you, then okay. But give it a try. Test me in this. J.D. Rockefeller said that he would have never tithed on his millions if he didn't first tithe on his first salary as a shoes salesman, $1.50 a week. Research shows that generosity goes down as income goes up. If you aren't a generous person when you're poor, it is highly likely that you won't become a generous person if you gain wealth. I want you to write this principle down. This is important. But God is not just interested in the 10%. He is interested in how you manage the other 90%. Not just the 10, but the other 90. And this has been the goal of this series, what we've been teaching on Sunday morning for a total of 10 weeks, and our strong encouragement for as many of you as willing to get into Financial Peace University, a 9-week class that is helping you to get your house in order according to God's principles so that you can experience financial freedom. But it's not just that. There is much more. Some of you in our congregation already make good money. You spend less than you take in. You have a good savings. You maybe even completely out of debt. And so you might even have taken the pass on this thinking you got it figured out. But Financial Peace University and this whole experience is designed to come alongside of you and to teach you God's principles. It's not just about making you wealthier so you have more for yourself. It's teaching God's principles on being managers of all that is His for you and for His grander purposes. You hear Dave Ramsey say this all the time. I love it. Live like no one else so that you later can live and give like no one else. This is how Roseanne and I have lived our married life together, according to these principles. Now, by no means do I want you to think we did it perfectly. Gosh, that would be horrible if you think we did it perfectly. But we were taught well, and we listened well, and we wanted God's blessing, and we didn't have a better idea. And so we just trusted God in this, and it has led to a blessed life, not just financially, but in so many ways. People who go after just financial riches end up having a lot of turmoil in their life. I want holistic success. I want the peace that can't come just by having lots of money. So like in all weeks, the practical principle of the follower of Jesus, so trusting in God, is every week you just open up your hands and say, God, I know what you want me to do with the 10%. I don't have any question about that. It's gone. But I still got this 90%. So what do you want me to do with that? And what do you want me to do with me and everything we have and everything we are? And so I did that this week while preparing this message. And something very strong happened to me in my personal study as I was preparing for this. God says, this is what I want you to do. He gave me a very scary assignment this week to disciple you, the congregation, in this big idea. God has entrusted you with money and everything that you have. You and I, here's the idea, are not the owners. We are mere managers of everything, including the breath you just took. God wants you to get this, because if you get it, if you trust Him, it'll put you into the path of blessing that so many people have experienced. This will be a game changer for you. So I thought we should have a trust project with some teeth in it. And so each one of you received this envelope, just 1 week trust exercise that will help you feel the weight of having the responsibility for someone else's money, okay? For just 1 week to feel the weight of having someone else's money. So how do you do that? So here's what I came up with. Here's what I believe God gave me. I want everyone to hold up your envelope here in the North Room, the South Sanctuary, and Speedway. Go ahead and hold yours up. And some of you online, you got in on this early. And those of you watching online, if you like this, we got a way for you to participate. Okay, hold that up. Now, what is in the envelope? I know some of you know because I saw you looking up in the light before. You just cannot help yourself, what is in there. You people amaze me, right? In every envelope, there is a $1 bill that I want you to carry around with you, okay? I want you to carry it around with you for one entire week, and then I actually need you to bring it back next week, okay? And the reason I say that is because this is not the church's money. This is my money out of my personal emergency fund. Now, you up in Speedway, I offered Brad, your pastor, the opportunity to participate in this, and he said no. So this is my money up in Speedway as well. This is true. Last Wednesday, I withdrew $1 for every adult represented. I took this out of our emergency fund, okay? And if you don't bring it back, there is going to be an emergency in the Frazee household. Roseanne and I have built a 6 to 3 month emergency fund, just like FPU taught us the 3 times we've taken it, as well as what we taught last week in the life of Joseph. Remember that? We taught you to save and to have an emergency fund, or at least I did have an emergency fund. I've now entrusted it to you. So I could really use your help here in bringing it back next week, because it's my money. So someone asked me, did you talk to Roseanne about this? And I did, but Roseanne and I never do anything in secret, ever, and particularly not with money. We're on the same page. And as a matter of fact, to prove it, when we went to the bank, I took a little video of her getting the money. Okay, we're gonna roll the video, and I want you to take a look at her face when she turns around, and you'll get an idea where she's at. You'll see here that the teller is going to say, now, are you sure that you want to do this? This seems like a really crazy idea. And Roseanne said, I'm sure. And she turns around and look at her face. She trusts you guys. And if you don't come through, I hope you like these clothes, because you're going to be seeing a lot of them, right? Now here's the thing. I'm trusting you with my money. I don't want you to invest it. That is a great idea. As a matter of fact, next week, Brad Norman's going to teach and give you $1. He's going to invite you to invest the money, because that was what Jesus would teach. And not only whatever he's given you, invest it, right? But I'm not wanting you to invest the money. I just want you to hold it for a week. I want you to feel the weight of being responsible for someone else's money. And I just want you to bring the $1 back next week, okay? I don't want you to try to multiply it or do anything with it. And here's the deal. If more comes back than we passed out, Roseanne and I are going to donate all the extra stuff. We don't want any more money. We're just going to donate. And we prayed about it. Roseanne, you may have seen Roseanne in the 9:30 service. Roseanne is a fluid interpreter of the deaf. She's been doing it since I was a teenager. She loves the deaf community. And there's a deaf church that wants to roll in with Westside Family Church. And this just touches our heart. Do you know that the deaf, percentage-wise, is the most unreached people group in the United States? There are fewer deaf that go to church than any other people group. And secondly, the deaf are one of the most abused people in the United States. It's because they have no voice, particularly sexually abused. And so they hold to themselves. They don't trust anybody. They're afraid. And a church like Westside, oh man, we get these kind of people, right? Because we are these kind of people, and they would just do so well. So anything more comes in, that's where the money is going to go, okay? All I want you to do is to feel the weight of carrying around the money of someone who loves you and trusts you and has put his faith in you. Because, friends, that's what God has done. He has trusted you with his money. And as your pastor, I just want you to feel the weight of that in a microscopic way, by being a good steward of my money and then bringing it back next week. next Sunday, there's going to be boxes. You might want to take a picture of this on your iPhone so you get this. But there's going to be boxes in our connection center, right? Like, look just like this. Take a snapshot of that. That's what it's going to look. It's going to look just like this. And you bring it back and you slip it in here, right? And there'll be Army Rangers by each one. I don't trust you that much. Do not stick this in the offering plate. This is not the church's money. This is my money, okay? This is my money. But here's the big application. Here's the number one thing the Lord gave me to try to pass on to you. Okay, here it is. Learn from this what it means for someone who loves you to take a risk because they trust you so much, because God's love for you and his trust in you is 1,000,000 times stronger.